The Aussie Bible has a few warnings of its own. Jesus wanted people to know that his Father wasn't one to be ignored. Big talkers who turned their back on God were going to be turned around. Not a popular message when Jesus hit the big smoke.
G'day. As Jesus and his team reached the outskirts of Jerusalem around Bethphage and Bethany at Mount Olive, he sent two of them on ahead. Pop down to the next town, he told them. As soon as you arrive, you'll see a nag, a young horse that's never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you what's going on, just say, the master needs it, it'll be back soon. So they nicked off to the next town and found the nag by the doorway in the main street. Some blokes who were hanging around said, "What do you think you're doing with that nag?" They repeated what Jesus had said, and the bloke said, "All right then." They brought the nag back to Jesus, threw some coats on its back, and Jesus sat on the beast. Some of the mob got excited and threw branches from palm trees and even their own coats on the ground. As Jesus rode into Jerusalem, the mob was barracking and cheering, "On your Jesus, on your God, go Jesus. He's God's promised one, the new King David, on your God, what a beauty." When Jesus arrived in Jerusalem, he went straight to the temple and had a squiz at everything. But because it was already late in the arvo, he went back to Bethany with the team. The next morning, Jesus went straight to the temple. And there, he did his lolly at the market stalls. Tipped over their stalls, chased out the dealers. He stopped the carriers carting their goods through the temple. He shouted, "The Bible says, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've turned it into a thieves' kitchen." The head honchos and their lawyers heard all of this and started plotting to have him knocked off. But they were afraid of his popularity because he was such a respected teacher. That evening, Jesus and the team left the city again. Jesus and his team returned to Jerusalem and the temple. The head honchos and their lawyers came over and asked him, "What right do you have to carry on like this? Who gave you authority?" Jesus responded, "First of all, I have a question for you, then I'll answer yours. Who gave John the Baptist the right to baptize? Was it God or was it his own idea?" This put the cat among the pigeons, and they said to each other, "We can't say it was God, or Jesus will ask, why didn't we believe him and let him baptize us? On the other hand, the mob thinks John was a real prophet, so we can't say it was his own idea." They were scared of the mob, so they told Jesus, "We have no idea actually." Jesus responded, "Well, in that case, I won't tell you where my authority comes from." Then Jesus told them a story. A certain squatter had a big property. He put in stockyards, fences, artesian bores, all the rest. Then he rented the place out to a bunch of tenant farmers and left. At harvest time, he sent his overseer to collect the rent. The tenants grabbed the overseer, gave him a good thrashing, and sent him away empty-handed. The squatter sent one of his drovers. They bashed this bloke up and gave him a proper tongue lashing. Then the squatter sent another. This one they actually killed. He kept sending one stockman after another. Some they bashed, some they killed. Finally, the squatter sent his son, who he loved very much. He thought they'd respect his son. But the tenants said to themselves, "Someday he'll own this property. Let's kill him. Then the whole farm could be ours." So they grabbed the squatter's son and killed him and threw his body out on the road. After telling the story, Jesus said, "What do you imagine that squatter will do? He'll come with the troopers, arrest those tenants. Someone else will get the property." The Bible says, "The brick the builders chucked aside has become the most important brick in the building." This is something God has done, and it's staggering. The head honchos knew it was them he was talking about and would have arrested him on the spot, except that they were afraid of the mob. So they left him alone and nicked off. The Pharisees put their heads together with some of King Herod's cronies. And they sent some blokes to put a trick question to Jesus, to try to get him to put his foot in it. They went to him and said, "Teacher, you're an honest man. You don't shape what you say to suit popular opinion. But you tell the truth of God. So then, should we pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus was onto them and said, "Trying to catch me out, are you? Show me a coin." So they brought him a coin. And he said, "Whose head is stamped on this?" "The emperor's," they said. "Caesar's." "Spot on," said Jesus. "So give Caesar what's his and give God what's his." They found this pretty breathtaking.
Australian stories talk about death, but don't go any further. The Aussie Bible says it's important to know what comes next. Jesus ended up in an argument with some blokes who laughed at the idea of the afterlife. Jesus warned them their jokes wouldn't do much good when they entered the life after death.
G'day. Sadducees are those bunch who don't believe in life after death. So some of them tried to bowl a bouncer at Jesus and said, "Teacher, Moses wrote that if a married man dies and leaves no kiddies, his brother should marry the widow," the idea being that their first son would be thought of as the son of the dead brother. Well, there were 7 brothers once. The first one married, but died without kids. The second brother married his brother's widow, but he also tumbled off the twig without having kids. Same thing happened to the third brother, and finally all 7 brothers. Not a lucky family when you think about it. At last, the woman died. Now, when God raises people back to life, whose wife will this Sheila be? After all, she'd been married to all 7 brothers. Jesus replied, "You're as thick as 3 short planks, and you don't know your Bible, and you don't understand the power of God. When God raises people to life, they're not married, and they don't marry. They're like angels in heaven." But about this business of life after death, don't you remember from the Bible, when God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush, he said, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob." He's the God of the living, not the dead. So you're dead wrong. A lawyer rolled up while Jesus and the Sadducees were having this argy-bargy. When he heard Jesus giving such neat answers, he asked, "What's the most important rule for living?" Jesus replied, "Top of the list is this: you have only one Lord and God. You must love him with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. The second most important one says, love others as much as you love yourself. Nothing else measures up to these 2. The man responded, "Oh, teacher, you're spot on when you say there's only one God, and we ought to love him with the whole of our hearts and brains and energy, and that we ought to love our neighbours like we love ourselves. These things matter more than being done by the priest in some ritual in church." When Jesus heard these sensible words, he said, "You're not a million miles away from God's kingdom." And after this, no one was game to ask him any questions. When Jesus was giving a talk in the plaza of the temple, he said, "How can the officials make out that the Christ, the promised one, is King David's great, etc. grandson? Old David himself, given the words by God's Spirit, wrote, 'The Lord God said to my Lord, come and stand by me while I make your enemies grovel at your feet.' Now, if King David called the Christ his Lord, how can he be David's great, etc. grandson?" The mob loved hearing Jesus talk. In one of his talks he said, "Keep a wary eye on the official teachers. They like to swan about in flash clothes and sit in the box seats at the meeting halls and have a spot at the top table at the best dinner parties. But they'll foreclose on a widow's mortgage and then go and pray a long, loud prayer. They'll really cop it from God." Jesus was sitting near the temple offering box. He saw the rich sticking in wads of folding money. Then he saw a widow, an old duck on the pension, drop in a couple of coins, just small change. Jesus called his team to gather round and said, "Straight up, this old lady put in more than all the rest, because the rest who kicked the kitty just stuck in what they could spare, while she put in her grocery money." As they were leaving the temple, one of the team said to him, "Don't you just love this building? The design, the big stones?" Jesus replied, "Take a good look, it won't last. This place will end up a heap of rubble." Later, Peter, John, Jim and Andy came to Jesus on Mount Olive on the slope facing the temple and asked, "When will this destruction happen? Will there be any warning signs?" Jesus replied, "Keep your eyes open. Don't let anyone fool you. Lots of blokes will bung on and act and say, 'Jesus sent me.' People will be fooled. When the news is full of wars and warmongering, don't lose your head. These things will happen, but it's not the end of the world. One lot will attack another and then they'll be attacked themselves. There'll be earthquakes, famines, all that stuff. But it's not the end, it's just the beginning, not the end. But watch it. You'll be dragged into court or given a really rough time in the meeting halls. Sometimes you'll be dragged before tin-pot presidents and power-mad magistrates. Stand up for me and my message. Before the end comes, the message about me has to be told around the world. When you're dragged before some tribunal, don't panic. Don't get nervous about what to say, because God can speak through you. He can put words in your mouth. Your own relatives will betray you and families will be divided. Everyone will look on you as some sort of mug because of me and my message. But if you stick with me to the bitter end, you'll be okay, and okay forever. If some clown says, here's the promised one, or there he is, use your loaf. Don't believe him, because pretenders and liars will turn up, doing signs and wonders, trying to lead even God's faithful few down a blind alley. So, be on your guard, and don't say I haven't warned you. Jesus told them, before the suffering will end, the sun itself will descend, alarm bells will chime, yet the moon will not shine, the whole cosmos will cry, and stars fall from the sky. Then, said Jesus, then I'll be seen surrounded by clouds of power and glory. I shall send out my messengers to gather my people from the four corners of the world, from all over the shop. There's a lesson to be learned from the humble fig tree. Its new leaves tell you summer's coming. When you see all this happening, you'll know the clock is ticking. The countdown has begun, and you will see it happen. Remember, even planets and suns finally die, but my words live forever. And no one knows when the end gets written in the big book. Not the angels, not even me. God alone knows, and that's a fact. So, stay on your toes, keep your eyes open. It's like when the boss goes away on a trip and leaves the staff in charge, each with their own job to do. Stick to your duty. Keep your eyes peeled, because you don't know when the boss is coming back. Might be tomorrow, or the day after, or next week, or whenever. So don't slack off. Pass this message on to everyone else and stay alert.
Politicians have played some dubious parts in Australian stories. The Aussie Bible records how Jesus met the pollies of his day head-on. He argued for a real relationship with God over dry religion. The debate became so heated that these leaders started discussing a more final solution to their Jesus problem.
G'day. It was now 2 days before the big do called the Passover, and the head honchos and lawyers put their heads together to cook up a way to lay their hands on Jesus and have him killed. They said, we've got to watch out what we do during the big festival, because the mob might go bananas. Meanwhile, Jesus was having dinner at Simon's home in Bethany. Simon's the one who used to have leprosy. During dinner, Sheila came in with a bottle of this really expensive perfume. She opened it up and splashed the contents of the bottle on Jesus. All around the table, people complained, what a waste! Could have been sold and for a stack of dough and given to the poor. But Jesus said, let her alone. This is a good thing she's done. You can look after the poor anytime, but I won't always be here. She's done what she could. She's prepared my body ahead of time for its burial. And honestly, wherever the message about me is heard around the world, what she's done today will be heard about too. Judas Iscariot, who was one of the team, went slinking off to the head honchos to turn Jesus in. They were delighted and offered him a blank cheque. So he promised to keep his eyes open for the right moment. It was the first day of the festival, when they traditionally ate the Lebanese bread and roast lamb. The team said to Jesus, where are we having dinner? Jesus said to two of the team, pop into the city and you'll see a bloke carrying a drum of water. Follow him. See which house he goes into and say to the owner, the master sent us to check out the guest room for tonight's dinner. He'll take you upstairs and show you a large dining room. You can get the dinner ready there. The two went into town and it all happened just the way Jesus said. So they prepared the dinner. That night, Jesus and the rest of the team joined them. While they were eating, Jesus said, one of the blokes at this table is planning to betray me. This plunged the team into gloom. And they said things like, oh, surely not, and not me at least. Jesus said, it's one of the team, one who's eating with me right now. I will die, just as the Bible predicted, but it will be hard yards for my betrayer. It would be better for that bloke if he'd never been born. While they were eating, Jesus took some of the bread, broke it, gave thanks to God for it, and he said, my body is just like this bread, and he gave it to them. Then he poured out a glass of wine, gave thanks to God for it, and as he handed round the wine, he said, this wine is like my blood, which is poured out for many people, the blood that seals my last will and testament. This is the last glass of wine I'll drink until I drink new wine in God's kingdom. And they sang a song together and went out to Mount Olive. Jesus said to the team, you'll all fail me, The Bible predicts I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. But after I come back to life again, I'll meet you in Galilee." Peter protested, "The rest of them might fail you, but not me." Jesus said to him, "Honestly, before sunrise, before the rooster crows twice, 3 times you'll deny even knowing me." Peter spluttered, but I'll die before I do that." And the others all said the same thing. Jesus and his team came to a spot among the olive trees called Gethsemane. He said to them, "Wait here for me while I go and pray." He took Peter, John and Jim with him. His heart was in his boots. "I feel like death," he said. "Stay here and keep me company." He went on a little further alone and then sank to the ground and began to pray that if it were at all possible, what he was facing would not happen. "Father, Father," he groaned, "you can do anything. Can I avoid this horror that's coming?" But in the end, it's got to be what you want, not what I want. Finally, he returned to the other 3, found them sleeping. "Peter," he said, "asleep? Was an hour too long to ask you to wait? Stay on guard and pray or you'll be overwhelmed. I'm sure the spirit is willing enough, but mere flesh and blood is weak." He went off again and prayed the same prayer using the same words. When he returned, he again found them sound asleep. And this time they were embarrassed, didn't know what to say. Then a 3rd time it happened. And when he returned, Jesus said, "Still sleeping? Enough. This is it. The time has come for me to be handed over to the evil schemers. Let's go. The traitor's almost here." As he said these words, Judas the traitor, one of the team, arrived leading a mob of blokes armed to the teeth with swords and clubs. They'd been sent by the head honchos and the lawyers. Judas the traitor had tipped them off. "Arrest the bloke I walk straight up to and kiss on the cheek. He's the one. Grab him, put him under guard." So Judas walked straight up to Jesus and said, "Master," and kissed him on the cheek. The guards rushed forward, grabbed Jesus by the arms. One of Jesus' team swung a sword wildly and lopped the ear off one of the guards, one who was on the staff of the high priest. Jesus said, "Am I some sort of thug or blagger that you've come out armed to the teeth to arrest me? I've been down in the temple giving talks every day. You could have arrested me there." But it's happened this way to fulfill the predictions in the Bible. At that point, all the remaining members of Jesus' team turned tail and ran. One was a young bloke who was wearing nothing but a toga. When the guards grabbed at his toga, he left it behind and ran off naked. They took Jesus off to the high priest's palace, where the head honchos, the community leaders and the lawyers were all gathered waiting for him. Peter followed, at a distance. In the palace courtyard, the guards had built a small campfire, and Peter sat down with them there to keep warm. Inside, the whole council was trying to find some scrap of evidence against Jesus so they could ask for the death penalty, but they're having trouble. The professional perjurers they lined up kept contradicting each other. Finally, some blokes who couldn't lie straight in bed got up and said, "We heard this character say he'd pull down our temple and he said in 3 days he'd magically build another one." But they still couldn't get their story straight. Then the high priest got up and said to Jesus, "Well, what about it? Have you got anything to say for yourself?" Jesus said nothing. So the priest said, "Well then, are you or are you not the promised one, the Christ? Are you or are you not God's own son?" Jesus said, "I am. And you shall see me in my glory and power lifted up in the clouds." At this, the high priest spat the dummy and did his lolly completely. "Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Did you hear what he said? Who needs witnesses? You've heard what he said. He insulted God. Come on, what do you say about that?" And they all voted for the death penalty. Then these community leaders gathered around Jesus and they began to spit on him and punch him. They blindfolded him and slapped him and said, "Prophesy then, who hit you?" They were still hitting him as they led him away. Meanwhile, Peter was around the fire in the courtyard below. A girl who worked in the kitchen saw him and said, "I know you. I've seen you hanging around with that Jesus from Nazareth." Peter denied it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he protested. "And you don't know what you're talking about either." He moved a bit further away, but the girl said to some of the guards, "This bloke's one of them." Peter shook his head and said, No, not a chance." Then one of the guards said, "You've got that funny accent. You're from Galilee." Peter began to curse and swear just like a fisherman and half shouted, "I don't even know this bloke you're talking about." At that moment, a rooster crowed for the 2nd time. Then Peter remembered those words of Jesus, "Before sunrise, before the rooster crows twice, 3 times you'll deny even knowing me." Peter rushed out into the darkness and broke down in tears.
The Australian continent has its share of tragic stories, but not all of them are caused by a cruel countryside. The Aussie Bible tells the story of a tragedy that has more to do with hard hearts than a hard land. A great bloke, the best, was once done in because he was too good. It was the day the mob put Jesus on trial.
G'day. At the crack of dawn, the head honchos, the community leaders and the lawyers, held a formal meeting as a council. They had Jesus tied up and marched him off to Governor Pilate. The governor said to Jesus, "Well then, are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You said it." Pilate said, "Just give me a straight answer. Look at the charge sheet they've brought against you." But Jesus said nothing further, and Pilate was puzzled. During the festival, Pilate always released one prisoner just to please the mob. At the time, his army had a bloke named Barabbas locked up. He'd been arrested as a terrorist and charged with murder. The crowd started yelling that it was festival time for Pilate to set a prisoner free. So Pilate asked them, "What about this bloke here? Do you want me to set free the King of the Jews?" But the head honchos had their own renter crowd mingled in through the mob, and they all yelled out for Barabbas to be released. "All right then," said Pilate. "But what about this other one? This one you tell me is the King of the Jews." "Kill him," the mob screamed, "kill him." "But what's he done?" shouted Pilate. "I can't figure it out. What on earth has he done?" But the mob set up a chant of "Kill him, kill him." Governor Pilate wanted to please the crowd, so he released Barabbas, had Jesus whipped, and then passed the death sentence on him. The Roman soldiers led Jesus inside the courtyard of the governor's palace, where they called out the whole regiment. They dressed him up in fancy dress, something like a king's robe, and put a pretend crown made of thorn branches on his head. Then they danced around, mocked him, made fun of him. "Oh, King of the Jews, oh dear King," they hooted. They hit him, spat on him, then knelt down and pretended to worship him. When they'd had their fun, they took the fancy dress off him, put him in his own clothes again, and the execution squad marched him out. On the way, they grabbed a bloke out of the crowd, a visitor from Cyrene, a bloke named Simon, the dad of Alexander and Rufus, and made him carry the wooden cross. They brought Jesus to Skull Rock, the execution site. They offered him drugged wine, but he knocked it back. Then they nailed him to the wooden cross. The execution squad played dice to see who'd get which bit of his clothing. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. They tacked a sign to his cross showing the charge against him. It said, "The King of the Jews." Jesus was executed between two thieves, one on either side. And the crowd made fun of Jesus, jeering, "Hey, you who can knock down temples and rebuild them in 3 days, show us how smart you are, get off your cross, come on down." The head honchos and lawyers were there having their bit of fun, saying to each other, "Oh, he rescued others, let's see if he can rescue himself. Let's see this King of the Jews get off his cross. Of course, if you do that, oh promised one, then we'll believe you." And the dying thieves joined in the mockery. At midday, the sky turned dark and the shadow remained until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At about that time, Jesus cried out in Aramaic, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you left me?" Someone in the mob said, "Listen, he's calling out to Elijah." Another man got some wine in a sponge and held it up for him to drink, saying, "Let's see if Elijah comes and takes him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. At that moment, the great curtain of the inner temple tore in two from top to bottom. The sergeant in charge of the execution squad, standing right in front of Jesus, saw him die and said, "It's true. This man was God's own son." At the back of the crowd were some Galilean women who'd come to Jerusalem with Jesus. Mary Magdalene, another Mary, Jim and Joe's mum, Salome, and some others. It was nearly sunset, and everything was about to shut down for the official day off. A bloke from Arimathea named Joseph, a member of the city council, a devout bloke who was waiting for God's kingdom, had the gumption to go to Governor Pilate and ask to be given the body of Jesus. The governor was a bit startled to hear that Jesus was already dead. So he called in the sergeant from the execution squad to check. When the sergeant reported that he'd double-checked and Jesus was really dead, dead as a doornail, Pilate said that Joseph could have the body. Joseph bought a long burial sheet, took the body down from the cross, wrapped the body in the sheet, and buried it in a nearby tomb, newly cut right into the rock. He rolled a big heavy stone in place to seal the tomb. The two Marys who'd seen Jesus die were there and saw the burial.